Good evening, everybody, from Rye Distillery, and welcome to our latest live tasting here from the Rye Distillery studio. My name is Frazer Matthews. I'm the Global Brand Ambassador for the distillery based here on Islay, and I'm delighted to say that tonight we'll be tasting through the amazing Regeneration project bottling released by the distillery just a couple of weeks ago. We hope that you at home have all ordered your bottles. You have them, the drams at hand, ready to taste along as we try the whisky with Head Distiller Adam Hannett. And of course, as with previous versions of this that we've done in the past, we want you to get your questions in. It's been a long time since we've done this. We've got a hell of a lot to catch up on. You can send your questions through to us either on the YouTube live video, on Facebook Live, or you can send us a tweet as well. Manning the socials will be the amazing Jane and Leslie. They'll be taking your questions. We'll try and pick as many of those as we possibly can. So please get those in. The geekier the better. And yeah, we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. But tonight's very special guest is, of course, Adam Hannett, Rye Distillery's head distiller. Adam.
Thank you, Fraser.
How are you? And what's been going on in the world of the head distiller since we last caught up?
I'm very well, thank you, first of all. Yeah, very excited to be tasting along with everyone tonight, so this is very, very exciting. Some amazing whiskey. I hope those corks are getting popped as we're talking. But around what hasn't been happening at the distillery since the last time we did any lives. Very busy at the moment. We're just going through our Islay barley or organic barley kind of program in the distillation. So very busy with that. Filling some amazing casks. A nice delivery of port casks today. So
very nice.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
Excellent stuff. Well, before we get started on the tasting, I know we've had some questions about this in the past, but in terms of this release in itself, the Regeneration project, of course, is part of a wider series of releases that kind of focus more on the innovation that's been happening at the distillery more recently. Yeah,
absolutely. So we have, again, the project releases. So the project releases, this is the third in the series so far, the Regeneration, and really it's to kind of take a look at the things that we're working on behind the scenes, the things, I suppose, from the sample room that I'm working on, and be able to just put them out there and basically start a conversation, think about some of the things we're doing, and let people taste the whiskey. For example, this Regeneration, it's 5 years old, it's just starting to come into its own, so we want to be able to get it out there, let people taste it, and see the progress we're making with the rye. So the project releases are really quite exciting, kind of unusual kind of things.
Yeah, and one of the other things that's been, a little bit of a hot topic for us is it's been well documented by ourselves that there's Islay grown rye in the mash bill and the recipe for this. However, on the label, we've actually got the words single grain whiskey on there. Can you shed a little bit of light into that?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the Scotch whisky regulations, but of course we are bound. When we make our whisky, normally we make single malt whisky. The single is referring to the single distillery because it's the product of one distillery, and of course the malt is malted barley. So when we start to introduce another grain, obviously using the rye, and we'll talk more about why we've done that later, but instead of being a rye whisky, the regulations dictate to us that we can call it a single from the single distillery, but grain because we're using more than one type of grain. So we're using malted barley and another grain in there, which of course is our Islay grown rye. So of course, we are well known for following the rules and doing what the SWA say. So no, I think it's important to do that. And again, it's more important is about the flavour and the context. And we're doing something new, so we're bound by the rules. But it doesn't mean we can't be part of change and maybe getting rye on the front of that label in the future.
Absolutely. And I mean, this really is an Islay first. I've been lucky enough to have a taste of it in the past, but for those of you at home that are waiting, bated breath in anticipation, I think it would be rude to keep the good people waiting any longer. So let's get cracking.
Shall we? Well, let's open a bottle. I'll pour you a little dram too, Fraser. You can taste along with us.
Excellent.
Just a small one. There we are. So yeah, we'll have a little taste of this. Hopefully, there's lots of people out there who've received their bottles or they're on their way. So if you aren't able to taste along with us right now, you can watch this again on YouTube. Open your bottle, have a little taste, because this for us is a really exciting project. The rye that we've used is Islay grown. It's part of a Regeneration project. It's part of there's lots of information on it on the website and things. But essentially, the rye is about a rotational crop. So Andrew Jones, a farmer up at Cool, has grown rye for us. You know, to grow a crop, you need to have a market. We'll be the market. We'll take that rye in and we'll try and make whiskey with it. For him, it's another crop. It breaks up his rotation. It's better for the soil health. The nutrients that rye puts back into the soil are good for the barley. So, you know, that's all really positive from the agricultural side. And again, for us, it's another challenge to be able to make another type of whiskey. We didn't quite realize how much of a challenge until we started making it. But, you know, this is what life is all about. It's about new challenges. And so this is our very first, from the very first harvest in 2017. The mash bill for this is quite interesting because it's 55% rye, 45% malted barley. So it's Islay grown barley as well with you, so it's 100% Islay grain. And we filled this into casks back in 2017, in December 2017, and I've been watching it quite impatiently for the last few years until it's ready. So this is our first release. There's 1,800 bottles. It's quite a small release, but we really want to get people interested in kind of tasting it. So let's do that. First of all, have a look at the colour, and that is a beautiful kind of golden syrup colour. This is coming from a mixture of virgin oak casks. These have been toasted, not charred, so the colour is quite gentle. That preserves the influence of the grain, the influence of the rye, that spicy licorice kind of flavour you get from the rye. So if you have a little nose, you're going to get that licorice straight away, that lovely spicy kind of cinnamon. It's really, really interesting. It's completely different to anything we've ever made before, and watching this develop, watching that come from the stills and seeing it, you know, mature in the cask has been fantastic. We filled a range of different types of casks. Just again, the virgin oak being toasted, not charred, some ex-American bourbon casks. So we've blended these together at this point to give a nice balance. And what we find from the wood, if you have a little taste, is this amazing softness. The wood just carries that flavour of the spirit really, really nicely. And you get little bits of that cinnamon, nutmeg, those spices, you know, those kind of baking spices from the oak. Oh, it's incredible, that mellowness, that sweetness, touches of vanilla. But all around there, we're really kind of showcasing the flavour from the grain. So what we get from the rye, again, that licorice, that spiciness that rye is renowned for, is really, really coming through there. That finish is quite long, that texture is viscous. So really, really interesting flavour. And again, at 5 years, I think it's got a nice balance. You know, I think that toasted on that virgin oak's bringing a lot. It's maturing really, really nicely. And yeah, that finish, that softness, it's a really interesting texture, but like nothing we have ever made before. There's a little note there of chocolate limes, which I think is always quite interesting, and that's coming from the combination of that kind of citrusy kind of flavour from the grain, but also the wood, that chocolate is coming from the wood, so that combination, the balance is really, really nice, even at 5 years. So, yeah, I hope everyone is enjoying that back home. I'm sure there'll be some taste notes flying their way through as well, which would be quite interesting to have a little.
Yes, Jane, is there anything coming through?
Yeah, we've got a great audience out there. Thank you, everyone. Barcelona, Canada, Switzerland, Belgium, Amsterdam, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Special shout out to the people who are still at work, but who are dedicated enough to. Yeah, your reward will come. And yeah, we've had a few taste notes. Just 5 years old, but already beautifully balanced with aromatic spice, sweet chocolate and custard notes. This is from Adam, Master of Malt. It's recognisably rye, but also tastes a lot like Bruichladdich. And we've had that as well from Felipe Schreiberg, who's written for Forbes. Like, it smells.
It's there for sure, yeah.
Smells like a Bruichladdich. Dave Broom, whiskey writer, saying it might seem gentle, but there's real energy here. Intriguing. If it was a piece of music, it would be Nick Cave's and the Bad Seeds' ability to switch instantly from melancholic softness to fury.
Interesting.
Nice, And yeah, we've had a bit more musical analogies, a balanced symphony of mild pepperiness, orchard fruits, toasted oak, finale of exquisite dark Swiss chocolate, as you were saying. That is from Thomas at Whiskey Saga. Wow, more Islay Rye, please, pretty pleased. And a few exclamation marks is coming from him.
Oh, we can do that.
I think it's gone down well.
That's really nice to hear. I think it's it's really nice to be able to taste along and get some of those kind of taste notes back, and that enjoyment, that enthusiasm. And again, think about the character of what it is we're doing. And that's a really interesting point about that balance between the flavour of the rye and that Islay Bruichladdich character. Because again, remember the ratio here is 55% rye, 45% malted barley. So there's going to be a big influence of that grain, the barley in there as well, which is really, really exciting.
There's a few questions about that actually, Adam. People asking how many mash bills did we experiment with? How did we arrive at that ratio? And have we learnt or tweaked anything since we first did that in 2017?
Yeah.
That's from Rye Legend on Instagram.
Like
and
it.
Stuart,
I love that.
Yeah,
he's watching from Portmore campsite just down the road here.
Tell him to come along. Come along.
And Noah John as well, also on Instagram.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting kind of question actually about the makeup and what we've learned, what we've done, because we started with 55%, 45%, thinking that we would kind of play it safe to begin with. The very first year, Andrew grew about 12 tons of rye. There wasn't a huge amount, enough to do kind of 5 kind of relatively small mashes for us. We knew that rye was going to be difficult. It's unmalted because it's such a small quantity. It's unmalted, and rye, if you know anything about rye, it's got very high kind of starch, kind of beta-glucan content, which when you mix with hot water kind of turns quite pasty. It's difficult to drain. So we wanted to make sure we had quite a lot of malt in there, malted barley, to give us the husk for drainage, and also the enzyme in that would help to start break down those starches potentially. So our idea was we'd do 55-45, and as the week wore on, we'd end up with maybe 70%, 30%, so 70% rye, 30% malted barley. It didn't work out like that at all. It was incredibly difficult to incredibly difficult. I still have nightmares. It's why I'm losing my hair actually with the rye. But it's really, really difficult to drain it. Again, we're working with 140-year-old mash tuns, so you know it was interesting. We thought we'd try more, but we didn't quite get there. So we need to keep that ratio quite high. But again, we've made rye a few times since. Andrew's managed to harvest a few more kind of batches of rye. So we've been able to work on a few different things with that. I won't spoil all the surprises now. And we're always still working on it. So we're always having conversations, always trying to improve, always trying to look at what we do to make it a little bit better, get more influence, make life easier. You know, usually, to give you an idea how difficult this is, and a regular 7-ton mash that we do at Bruichladdich of 100% malted barley is about 9 hours, 9.5 hours. A 4-ton mash of rye could take us 15. So It's difficult to work with, but again, it's a challenge. We like a challenge, and at the end of the day, all of that difficulty, all of that pulling your hair out, we end up with an amazing spirit at the end. You know, the fermentation is different, the way it runs through the stills is different, but you're always learning, always pushing and trying things. So it's been a really interesting process, and we're still working, we're still developing with it. Yeah.
And I guess this being the 2017 distillation, the first time that rye had been grown on Islay for, well, perhaps ever for whisky production at least. How's the last 5 years been in terms of how this spirit has developed, but maybe some of the other things that may or may not be in the warehouse? I mean, it is our worst kept secret.
I've said this many times because there's been so many people who've come and I'll kind of take them into the warehouse and we'll have a wee, and I'll tell them, look, you are the first people to taste this. So that's what I tell everyone.
You told me that.
That's what I tell everyone who tastes it. You know, so it's something I've been really keen to share. It's really interesting. It tells a great story for us. That again, it's that connection to the growers, to the farmers. You know, we're part of the agricultural industry. You know, when we're making whiskey, we've got to be kind of really thoughtful and take action about how we do things. So when Andrew was thinking about rye and that rotational kind of crop, breaking up that rotation, it was really interesting for us to get involved in it. It's all about that kind of agricultural connection, as I say. Yeah. But yeah, so that was the part of it. It's a great story to tell. Excuse me, a great story to tell. But it's been amazing to watch it mature. And each time you go to the casks, I mentioned we've got a few different types of casks, but watching each one develop and seeing how it's coming through. You know, I looked at this maybe about 3 years old because some of the casks were just incredible. You know, the power coming from the oak and the way it was working with the flavours and the rye was absolutely beautiful. But overall, it just wasn't quite ready. It still had a bit too much youth in it, and actually just holding back another couple of years just to let you taste what's happening now. It's an amazing spirit, you know, in its own right. So it's been exciting to do something we've never done before. Watch how it develops, and actually that 5 years feels like a really short time. But that first distillation, we still have casks in the warehouse maturing. They're going to mature. I mean, what's that going to taste like at 10? You know, so we've been quite careful with the cask choice to fill so that we can experiment over a longer time. We've not used charred American oak casks that typically you would find with a rye whiskey, because we want the influence of the grain to come through over a long period of time as well. So, we'll see what the future holds.
Fantastic. Jane, any good questions coming through?
Yeah, there's quite a few about the farm, actually.
Excellent.
Whether this is from Rin Allen on Instagram from New York. Was it a challenge to convince the farm to grow rye for us the first time? And what challenges did they face? Dramface on Instagram wants to know, is the rye all from one farm? And yes, it is, while we're still at this small experimental stage. And as a rotational crop, how does that work in? How often is it needed? And the Isla climate, is it better suited to barley or rye? Something about the farm, I think.
Good questions, yeah. So for the rye, it comes from one farm, which is Cool Farm, which is out on the west coast of Islay. Again, you can see in the footage, you'll see lovely pictures, lovely images of the farm there. Andrew Jones, we know Andrew very well, and the conversation kind of started, interestingly enough, in the Coast Guard hut. So Andrew's a volunteer Coast Guard, Alan Logan, the production director, volunteer Coast Guard. I also was a volunteer Coast Guard, and so one night after training we had basically had this discussion, or Andrew and Alan had this discussion, that would he grow rye, and kind of Andrew was saying, well, if I grew rye, would you buy it? It was a kind of, it came from Andrew initially, because he was looking to, again, to do things that would improve the quality of the soil, improve the quality of, the barley he's growing for us as well. And it was a really interesting thing. Alan was very keen to try it, so that conversation kind of sparked off. He put the seed in. We went away and started working on the process and the distillation of what we would do and how we'd fit it in. And again, you've got to try these things. So it was good. But Andrew's the only grower of rye for us on Islay at the moment. What he's seeing is a real difference in the inputs, the fertilizers, all that kind of stuff that he would normally put on the field. Once he's put the rye in and then they put barley in afterwards, you need a lot less kind of inputs, which is great. So from a financial point of view, it's great, but also from a sustainability point of view, it's a lot better. I'm not saying we've solved all the world's problems, but it's a step in the right direction, which is really, really good. The rye itself does do very well here. So I think Andrew was saying last year he didn't need to put any applications on at all, so it grew really well. The straw is also really interesting for to go back into the soil. And what was the other point I was going to say there? There was something else I was thinking of. Climate, well, it's just kind of wet and windy and terrible here. But actually, that's one of the things. The very first crop, obviously, Alan and I were really keen to see, so we went off to the farm to see. And the first time we saw it, it was kind of coming up nicely, looking really good. And it was probably kind of waist height. Or knee height for Alan, but waist height for me. And we went back a few weeks later, maybe a month or two later, and it was about 6 foot tall, so I was lost in the field. I couldn't see where I was. I was in there for 3 days. But so it grows very tall, which again, when you think about the winds we get, again, these right on the west coast there, so the wind that's coming through, it did lodge a little bit on that point. So again, it's learning, it's developing all the time. So I think the great thing about Andrew is he's up for the challenge. He's grown it for a few years for us, so he's seen the benefits, and this is the thing, it's the proof. What he's seeing is the benefits to him. As other people start seeing that, potentially we start to move forward and do a bit more, potentially. Yeah,
for sure. And I think to just add a little bit extra to that, barley as it grows, right, it's stripping nutrient from the soil that it's growing in. Therefore, that land, to talk, crop rotation and that whole concept, that land can't be used the following year for barley. Whereas rye, it'll grow in poorer soil conditions, and we'll give those nutrients back.
Absolutely, it's got deeper roots as well. So again, for drainage and that kind of thing, it's good. So the following year, if it does get, you put barley in that field, if it does get wet, then you find that actually it drains a little bit better. So again, it's just about balance. It's about, in the whiskey we want to make sure we've got balance there. The flavours are complementary, and again, it's about farming. If you've got balance, if you've got that rotation, if you can use things to complement each other. Again, it's long-term thinking. You're maybe thinking of a 7-year rotation, but with grass, with cattle, with sheep, with the rye, with barley. All of a sudden, it's better for their health than if you just put barley in and more fertiliser. So it's a really positive step.
Great. Excellent stuff. Jane, anything else coming through?
I was just, my own brain was spinning off about sustainability when you were saying that, Adam. and how sometimes on the socials, not necessarily tonight, but we do get a bit of kind of pushback of like, guys, just stick to the whiskey. You make great whiskey. What's all this other, stuff going on? And wondering whether there's anything you want to comment on about that.
With sustainability, I think I don't see any reason why you can't be sustainable and make great whiskey. I think what we've learned over the last 20 years in terms of our kind of barley exploration, if you like, what we're doing with bare barley, with different varieties, working with like the James Hutton Institute on regenerative farming and these kind of things, different varieties of barley that suits the West Coast. It's all working in the right direction in terms of sustainability. We're always thinking the right things, but we're making amazing whiskey as well. You think back to some of those amazing, like the bare barley, a heritage variety, it's a very old variety, it's genetic diversity, it's very different to the modern strains today. It maybe doesn't yield as much, but it gives us more flavour. And again, it's thinking about the modern varieties that grow in different places and need fertilizer. Maybe we can look a different way. It's trying to kind of think a bit differently. And actually what we find with the different, focusing on the idea of terroir and different barley grown in different farms, all of a sudden you're creating different flavours because the soil, the area, the land is giving you something different, the conditions are giving you something different. And when you start to blend and create a single malt with more flavours, you get a broader, rounder flavour profile. So again, thinking of putting flavour first doesn't mean that we're not being sustainable. Actually being sustainable means we are putting flavour first. And that's a really interesting kind of way of thinking about it. So for me, they go hand in hand, and actually the approach we take helps, in terms of making amazing whiskey.
You mean because we're looking for diversity, and then diversity helps on the in the farms?
Absolutely.
Well? Right.
Again, if we just start to, we make single malt whiskey here. If that's all we did, then we wouldn't be doing this. So this is a step in that right direction to say, well, we can make single malt whiskey, but we can also make rye whiskey or single grain whiskey, and then we can keep that conversation going. And maybe there's other things we can do that just help with the sustainable agenda that we have. So.
Yeah, another thing we talk about a lot as a distillery is the fact that we're now a B Corp. B Corp is an organisation, fantastic organisation. They're a group of businesses who are really putting people and the planet on an even footing to profit. And when we talk about sustainability, of course, the environment plays a huge part in that. We're a small island, it's a relatively small ecosystem, and we want to be supporting that as much as possible. But it's also the social sustainability of that, working with 20 local farmers, giving them a route to market for a crop they otherwise wouldn't really have a market for. It's so important.
Well, look, it's a great point. If you know anything about whiskey, then the barley you get from the east coast of Scotland is much better than the west coast in terms of yield. So we get less. But what we do is we want an Isle of provenance, an Isle of flavour and authenticity in there. But we also want to support the community. Like since day one, that's been a really, really important thing. So today we have a community of about 20 growers who grow barley for us on the island, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on what they're thinking. But essentially, the money that goes back into the community for those farmers is to sustain them, for that crop that they raise for us. They wouldn't get anywhere else because the conventional wisdom is you can't do it here. Yeah. So we sacrifice yield, we gain in flavour, and we benefit the community, and that's the way that we think, that's the way it should be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jane, any last points or questions?
Well, there's quite a lot in my category, other.
Those are usually the best ones.
Coming in from, now where's this come from? I'm sorry, I can't
you
quite
take your
trace
time.
the source.
I'm going to have another.
I'm quite enjoying this little
but
break.
The question is, are you guys going to finish some single malt in those spent rye casks? That's from Things to Watch Later on YouTube. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that question? Yeah. Well, absolutely, we will do. So again, 1,800 bottles isn't a lot. We didn't make a lot. We filled about 30 casks back in 2017. So we've emptied, I think, 6 casks for this. It was very, very small, but they will get filled back with whiskey, so single malt Bruichladdich whiskey, and we'll see how that influences the flavour of that later on. So again, the benefits of doing this just mean we're adding more complexity into that into kind of that Bruichladdich kind of filling, if you like. We have. I'll try not to give too much away here, but we have. It's going to be difficult.
And you're the first people to find this out.
Yeah, well. This is true. So this is totally unscripted. So some of the rye we made in subsequent years we have recasked into other types of casks. So the ones that we have emptied, because these were charred American oak and they gave it an immense flavour very quickly, so we took the whiskey out of there. We have put some Octomore into those casks this year. So
wow.
We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes as well. So again, we're already thinking about that as well, about the benefits and the flavour profile of our whiskey as well.
Fantastic. There's some more kind of whiskey-related questions. Do we have time for us for 2 or 3 if we do snappy action?
Go on, Jane.
I'll be quick.
Give the people what they want.
What was the ABV before it was reduced to 50%, and what was the difference in the flavours? That's from Christian Gruss on Facebook.
Yeah, great question. So when we had done the distillation, so of course obviously the mashing was incredibly difficult, fermentation was quite interesting, through the stills. The stills was a lovely moment because of course we had never made that before, so we started from scratch. So we had to do a few blind runs on the still, so we didn't take any spirit, so we could build up the faints to get the balance and then come through. So that's why we only filled about 30 casks. And that was quite a nice moment. I'll tell a brief story. I know we're kind of running out of time, but it'll be really brief because like making whiskey on Islay is a real privilege, you know, and it's something that I'm really, really proud to do. And actually, there's nothing better than being in that still house, you know, watching that spirit run. You're in control. Everyone else is asleep, and you're there making whiskey. It's an amazing thing. So I've always kind of really enjoyed that aspect of what it is we do, you know. But what we do at Bruichladdich is not unique. You know, there's people have been making whiskey here for hundreds of years. So we're always following in their footsteps. And actually, there was a moment when we were doing that very first cut, and it started to sink in. Actually, nobody's ever done this before. Of all the things, of all the whiskey made on Islay. And there was a nice moment. So I was there at like 3 o'clock in the morning, ready to kind of take those cuts and make that cut in the spirit. And the Budgie was there with me. So Budgie's one of our stillmen. He's been working here since 1989. It feels like longer, but he's been here a long time. He taught me how to run the stills. So we're kind of like the guy who taught me and myself were there at 3 o'clock in the morning judging when to take that cut. And I said to him, you know, Budgie, this is quite a cool thing. No one's ever done this before. So he kind of took a step back and let me do it all. But it was a nice thing to, just a nice moment where all of these things we do and that pride we have in making whiskey at Bruichladdich, there was something where that no one else had done before. We were the first ones doing it, and it was a really, really nice moment to share with him. But what we found, taking those cuts and, you know, kind of tasting and nosing as the spirit came through, we ended up with the spirit about 70% alcohol in total from the beginning and the end of the spirit run. And actually what we did with that spirit was we filled some of it into the casks at 70 as we normally would, but we reduced some because we put a little bit of water, which we don't normally do, but just again to give us an alternative and see how it developed, because we're experimenting here, why not keep experimenting? So we filled some at 65% and watched those mature as well. So what we have here is a combination of both of those, which again is giving us that broad, round flavour profile. Interesting.
One more, David and Jan Wilson on email, who I know are great friends of Frazer's.
Hey guys.
Special shout out. Being Canadian, I like my rye, says David. Any chance of a smoky one in the future?
What can I say? There's every chance of a smoky one, David, absolutely, every chance. So Bruichladdich, of course we're going to keep trying things. You know.
So
actually,
yeah.
on that subject, was there much you did in terms of research before you...
Oh yeah, good question,
before we started this project?
I'm going to use the term research very loosely, but I did drink quite a lot of rye, which was nice to do because it really gave you a feeling of you know what rye is. A lot of it was obviously American and Canadian rye. And that was one of the things that actually what I found was, because particularly in America using a lot of charred oak, that you find even at quite a young age you get a lot of influence of the oak. And I was really keen that initially we would not fill charred oak because we want that grain to come through as much as possible, knowing that it's unmalted, knowing that again we're going to start at quite a high proportion of malt in there as well. That actually toasting the wood. So we worked with Sig and Moreau, the cooperage there, to kind of pick some casks and work on the selection of oak to be able to allow the grain to be, because that's the story here. That's the central character. It's that spiciness that we want. And again, knowing the way we work with wood, toasting it would be the best way to do it. So so we did a lot of research to get to that point. A lot of research.
You're one of few people in the position to be able to justify that as research.
Exactly. If I have a dram for breakfast, it's okay.
Exactly.
It's research.
Exactly, as I'm sure you do. I guess on that topic, and as we discussed near the start with the categorisation of whisky, and how although this is a rye whiskey. In a way,
Yeah.
it's classified as a single grain. Do you think there's anything that we can learn as an industry from some of the other authorities out there, the Canadian, American side of things?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I would say, again, looking at the kind of the global kind of whiskey and the rules and regulations, I think in Scotland we've got it pretty spot on. Again, we can always move with the times. We're not the only people in Scotland to make rye whiskey, so there's other distilleries out there making it. And I think as we move forward with it, we can maybe change some of the legislation. So instead of saying single grain, we can say, look, it's a rye whiskey, as long as it meets certain criteria, as you would in America. So in America, if your mash bill is 51% or more, you can call it a rye whiskey, which makes sense, So there's things we can learn, but I think in Scotland we're pretty good. The rules and the regulations aren't restrictive. They really allow a level of kind of quality and a level of trust in what it is we do, which maybe you don't see in other markets where it's maybe less regulated. So I would think that in Scotland, pretty good. We've had a lot of conversations. The team have had a lot of conversations with the SWA about the naming and why couldn't we call it rye whiskey. It's not going to stop us releasing it. Yeah. It's amazing whiskey, and we'll work in the right way to be able to kind of take it forward and make it a little bit clearer for everyone. So,
brilliant. Well,
good question.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you very much to the amazing team on the social desk. But most importantly, thanks to all of you at home for tuning in. We hope that if you had the bottle, you tasted along and you enjoyed the dram. If your bottle's on its way, as Adam mentioned at the start, this will be available to watch back for you to play along when you have the liquid there. If you don't have a bottle, again, Adam said there are only 1,800 available, so that there's not many left. You can still get those on our website. And if this has inspired you to look into more about what we're doing with barley, with agriculture, with rye, there's some amazing stuff on our YouTube channel. We uploaded a great video of Alan Logan, our production director, along with Andrew Jones, who was the farmer who grew this rye. There's an amazing podcast episode with the brilliant senior tour guide and self-confessed barley geek, Leslie McGeechy, on the website. There's some stuff coming up as well with Dave Broom. So if this didn't quite scratch the itch, there's plenty more out there, and I'm sure the barley, grain, cereal, agriculture focused stuff will keep on coming from us. So all that's left for me to do again is to thank you so much for tuning in, say Slanjava, and enjoy the rest of what's left of your day.